Hey, there goes one of those petticoat soldiers now.
Yeah. My sister wants to join the wax. What do you think of that?
Huh. She's crazy. What the devil's a woman want to be a soldier for?
Just a waste of time. This is a man's war. What sort of jobs can they do?
In May 1941, Congresswoman Edith Norris Rogers introduced a bill to create a women's auxiliary, separate from the Army Nurse Corps. Rogers wanted women to be part of the Army so they could serve their country effectively.
The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or the WAAC, was an auxiliary unit, not part of the Army. Since there was conflict in making the WAAC fully integrated into the Army, it was not easy to come to a compromise. The compromise affected women's rights long into the future. It affected how people and women themselves perceived women in general, which shaped how future interactions came about. It affected identities and relationships. Women started to be treated more as equals and started to have better opportunities than before. The women of America felt like the values of the country was built on affected them too, not just men.
The bill to create the WAAC, introduced by Edith Norris Rogers, was not approved until May 1942, about a year after it was first introduced. And even then, women were not officially part of the Army. While women could help with the war effort and were able to work background jobs because the WAAC was not part of the Army, the women were not allowed to fight.
On May 16, 1942, Ovida Culp Hobby was appointed the first director of the WAAC. She was the ideal choice because she could be considered a proper lady, which would appeal to the public, but she was also capable of commanding troops.
Over 35,000 women applied for less than 1,000 positions, much more than was expected. The first training was on July 20, 1942. The training was much different from the men's training. The physical training was less difficult. They had makeup classes and were required to carry lipstick at all times. But as they became more important, they were allowed to attend basic rifle training and take classes with men.
By October 27, 1942, 27 WAAC companies were active at aircraft warning stations, or AWSs, where they manned filter boards and plotted and tracked aircrafts. Later, they were sent to Army Air Forces, or AAFs, Army Ground Forces, or AGFs, and Army Service Forces, or ASFs, where they worked as file clerks, typists, stenographers, or motor pool drivers at first. But eventually, each service found other jobs for the women to fill. The AAF especially wanted the WAACs, and they were well treated. They worked as radio operators and repairmen, bomb site maintenance specialists, aerial photograph analysts, control tower operators, and many more non-combat positions. A few Army Air Force WAACs had flying duties. They were crew members on training flights, some were assigned regular flights, and worked as mechanics and photographers.
The ASF received 40% of the WAACs. Many worked as draftsmen, mechanics, and electricians, and some received training in ordnance engineering. Due to their success, in January 1943, Edith Norris Rogers proposed a bill for the WAAC to be integrated into the Army instead of an offshoot of the military.
Things were going well for the WAAC. Some people were not convinced that women should be in war. This started the slander campaign, or rumor campaign, in May of 1943, which continued on after this time period as well.
The rumor spread that the WAACs were prostitutes and were stealing the hearts of the soldiers, were meant to discredit and wreck the organization. These rumors made many want to stop funding the WAACs, and many families of the soldiers disowned them, saying if they became a WAAC, they became a prostitute and that women had no place in a war.
Even though the slander campaign made an impact on the soldiers the entirety of when the rumors were being spread, it hit the WAAC hardest in June 1943, when recruitment numbers decreased dramatically. This sudden lack of interest in women in the WAAC showed that enlisted women wanted to have the same equal rank, benefits, privileges, and protection as regular Army soldiers, so they were not seen as a lesser part of the Army.
This protest caused President Franklin D. Roosevelt to sign a bill giving the WAACs all these privileges on July 1, 1943. Since the government was still skeptical on making the WAACs officially integrated into the Army, this bill also gave most of the wishes from Edith Norris Rogers' proposal earlier that year by making the WAACs a branch within the Army, creating the Women's Army Corps, or the WAC.
These troops continued to train at Fort Des Moines, but also made different bases across the country. Unlike the normal Army, the WACs had troops from all 50 states and U.S. territories, including 200 soldiers from Puerto Rico and second-generation Japanese.
The WAC's first mission overseas was to Normandy, after the invasion on June 14, 1943. There, the WACs repaired vehicles and radios, helping to free airspace, and many more non-combatant jobs.
Even though they had the same benefits and protection as Army soldiers, the WACs still had the issue of equality. Their uniforms, consisting of a blouse, shorts, and a wraparound skirt, made it impossible for the WACs to even defend themselves, much less be in the field. Their uniforms could wrinkle easily, making the strict dress code extremely difficult to follow.
Even the spouses of the WACs were unequal to military rights. Husbands would not get nearly the same compensation if their wife were to die or get injured overseas as a wife would to their enlisted Army soldier.
Although even more protests were made, a bill was not signed to integrate WACs into the Army until President Harry Truman signed the bill to integrate the WACs into the Army in different increments.
For 2 years after the act was signed on January 6, 1948, no more than 7,500 officers could be enlisted, including 500 commissioned officers and 75 warrant officers. Although the WAC wasn't fully disbanded until October 20, 1978, women had the choice of either being in the Army or the WACs until then, and had the same compensation and uniforms as the members of the Army. They could have any position that they worked towards, including out in the front line eventually.
Giving the women who are part of the WAAC the same benefits as men in the armed forces was a compromise that significantly impacted women's rights in many years to come. Even though they had the right to vote, they were not completely seen as equals. Able to become part of the Army and be equals within the Army showed everyone that women were just as capable as men.